Chapter 1. Xander versus the Demon. Cyrus Harper. He had once been a vampire, a Sangsuiga if the accounts were true, and a well-respected one at that. But who and what he had been meant little for what he'd become and what it was making him into. Xander had heard of this type of thing, had dealt with his fair share of risen corpses driven by foreign auras, and even met a few unique cases of people who'd been possessed by auric beings, and most of the time, it wasn't worth a second glance. However, he had read of cases that led to unnatural transformations from Estella's collection of spell books and the few pieces of literature that Marcus had lying around the apartment as makeshift coasters. Nothing in either his witch friend's library or his vampire mentor's worn-out coffee table had offered much on the subject. What information was present, however, was limited and usually contradicted one of the other sources. The anomaly. Xander found himself growing less and less fond of that word with every time he encountered it, had different names and explanations that spanned both culture and history, and not one of which he agreed with wholeheartedly. He wasn't about to deny the obvious existence of vampires and therions, and all other breeds of mythos gallivanting the globe. There was a point where reality took a swirling trip down the crapper, and the steaming load of fairy tale bullshit took over. Either way, whether the source was anchored more in science or in religion, the overall theme was clear. Outside energies from taking control of a body that wasn't theirs. Words like angels and demons and ghosts seemed to be popular and downright overused for documented situations, but from Xander's experience, all of that life after death jazz boiled down to one constant: souls, essences, consciousness. The proverbial driver behind the wheel of everything with mind enough to be self-aware. In a word, auras. Like the people they represented in life, these energies were unique and followed an equally unique path of morals and focus, and even without the body, they still existed in their most basic essence. The driving forces behind them lending to either angelic or demonic labels from any who observed them and their activity. And while it wasn't in Xander's interest to decide if good auras were angels or bad auras were demons, there was no denying that Harper's experience was pretty damn far from heavenly. If nothing else, he certainly looked like hell. When all the lectures and scriptures were wiped away, though, there was one certainty: it could be killed. And that was all that Xander needed to concern himself with. Shifting gears and cranking the accelerator on his stolen BMW motorcycle, he followed after the winged creature that Harper had become. The engine roared, sending its angry echo over the barren concrete as he banked into a hard turn that brought the tip of his right knee once again in contact with the street. With the denim long since stripped from the area, his kneecap skidded across the paved surface and left a bloody trail in its wake that served as the only testament to the lingering injury, which healed over moments after he'd leveled out. Though the sensation was far from pleasant and, moreover, avoidable, slowing down wasn't an option, especially when the only reason to do so was to spare himself the lingering discomfort from fleeting wounds. Besides, he knew that every drop of blood he'd left on the street was driving Harper's thirst nearer and nearer to the unbearable. Demanding more from the already tortured motorcycle, the young vampire tore through the back roads like the shrieking horror that he pursued. Looking up into the night sky, he could make out the outline of the bat-like wings that had exploded out of Harper's back. According to his employer, these were a somewhat recent mutation, which, along with most of the more unsettling changes, had turned him into something that looked like it had crept out of a Wes Craven picture. something with a newfound control of its aura. As the two raced deeper and deeper into the darkness of the winding roads and ever-deepening surrounding forest, an unseen battle waged between them. While Xander wasn't in any mood to ponder the how or why behind it, somehow the change had given the once limited vampire the ability to not only see the otherwise invisible energy force, but to also use it. With this new control and sight, Harper used this new gift to roll and dodge each blood-red bolt that Xander threw at him. Finally giving up and pulling his aura back into himself, Xander swore under his breath and shook a sweaty patch of his black hair from his brow as it threatened to spill into his vision like an oil slick. An unearthly screech sounded then, echoing through the trees from above. Seeing his target arc around through the canopy of trees, Xander swerved the bike out of the path of Harper's attack. The motorcycle wavered briefly and threatened to topple beneath him as he wrestled it upright before screeching to a noisy halt and steadying it on one leg as he watched Harper's bony and misshapen feet touch down onto the street. "You!" The creature's voice sounded stale and echoed, like a ghost calling out from the bottom of a well. "You have been sent, yes? Sent to kill me?" He stood, his twisted body going as straight as it would allow, and his aura raged and flared like a stoked fire. Xander frowned at the sight as he analyzed the creature's writhing energy signature and couldn't help but to compare it to the color of old dog shit. He shook his head and sneered. Everything about what Harper had become was repulsive. Using the toe of his boot, Xander pulled the kickstand out and steadied the motorcycle against it before climbing off. "Yes, I was," he answered, stretching his shoulders beneath his red leather jacket. "By a friend of yours, no less." Harper's oversized jaw stretched into a hideous grin that exposed his teeth, some of which had grown out of proportion while others had fallen out, leaving him looking like a rotted jack-o'-lantern. "Yes, I was certain that Father Tennyson would be—" He wet his cracked lips with a long, festering tongue. "Disappointed by the outcome of our brief meeting. I was expecting him to try something, but this?" He leaned on his knuckles and scuttled forward a bit, intrigue twisting his expression further. Xander narrowed his eyes, unsure if his mind had just been read or if Harper was just astute. "Has the old fart really become so desperate as to ask a vampire for help?" He chortled, a sound that made Xander's insides retch, and shook his head. My, the lengths a desperate human will cross." Xander nodded once as he reached for Yang's handle. "From what I've been told, he's traveled with far stranger company, and besides," he pulled the bone-white custom-made 8-chambered revolver from its holster under his left arm and held it at his side. "The priest knows when it's time to admit defeat and call upon someone who can get the job done before something like you can get out of hand." Harper leered at that and stood upright once again, trying his best to appear regal, despite everything about him working against the effort. His misshapen head rolled about on his twisted shoulders before cocking to one side as he sized up his opponent. "And for this he sent you, a boy, nothing more than a fledgling? The priest must be far, far crazier than I'd guessed," he snickered. "That, or you are far stronger than you seem, strong enough to be called upon to handle an exorcism of such." He paused to look at his own hand and grinned, making an example to wave the mutated limb at Xander. "Grand proportions." Xander smirked at Harper's assumptions. He understood that his appearance wasn't at all intimidating, especially not to a creature like Harper. Having been changed into a vampire only a year earlier on his 18th birthday, he still retained the same boyish features he had as a human. And though he wasn't short, his scrawny frame hidden beneath his bulky jacket, and his wind-licked shaggy black hair did make him look like an overgrown child who'd just woken up and decided to play dress-up with his biker daddy's clothes. The only menacing feature he could think of that might work in his favor was his blood-red right eye and its pitch-black pupil, along with its hazel partner, now narrowed at Harper. "There's not going to be any exorcism." Xander tapped the gun against his hip several times. "And I can't vouch for being something special, but I guess I got Tennyson's attention," he smirked, when he heard that the son of Joseph Stryker was taking on jobs. There was a flash of intrigue in Harper's sunken eyes as he gave Xander a once-over in this new light. "You are of Stryker's blood?" Xander smiled, letting his fangs extend and fall past his lips. "That's right," he said in a mocking tone, knowing full well that he had heard of his late father, a powerful and world-renowned Auric that had co-created the once proud Odin clan. "Does that mean anything to you?" Harper growled deep in his throat. "Only that your blood will taste all the sweeter." The monster tensed its legs and pushed off, lunging at Xander with a roar. His speed was more than Xander had expected, and the young vampire barely had time to react before Harper's elongated fingers were on him, forcing him down to the street. "Get off me, you ugly fuck!" he screamed, pulling free of the twisted creature's grip and kicking out at it. As the heavy boot drove forward and caught the hissing monster in the sternum with a loud crunch, Xander felt a wave of satisfaction. Harper howled in pain as he was thrown off and crashed into the street a short distance away. He rose, letting out an enraged roar that opened his mouth wide enough to see down his gullet. In the distance, with Harper's inhuman wail carrying into the woods, a large, startled animal crashed through the brush, distancing itself from the road and the warring monsters occupying it. "After I finish with you, I shall tear out the priest's heart for insulting me in this fashion." He swiped out with his gnarled hands and hooked one of his talons on Xander's jacket and hurled him into an evergreen tree, which bent under his weight before catapulting him and dropping him to the forest floor. "Sending a boy, nothing more than a mockery of his father, to kill me." With that, the demon jumped into the air and disappeared in the treetops. Xander had learned early on in his career as a mythos bounty hunter to keep a grip on his weapons. His mentor and sole surviving companion from the late Odin clan, Marcus, was sure to make this lesson a priority from the beginning. However, the unexpected speed of the demon, Harper, and the fall from the top of the pine had been enough to, despite all his training and effort, throw Yang from his grasp and several meters off. Groaning and rising to his feet, he pulled a wayward pine needle from his ear and tossed it aside before reaching with his left hand into the other holster under his right arm for Yin, Yang's solid black twin. Illustrating his surprising and, quite frankly, unsettling speed and agility once again, Harper dropped down from above, grabbing the young vampire's face in his monstrous claws and slamming the back of his head into the trunk of a nearby tree. Xander, distantly aware of something snapping and hoping it wasn't his skull, struggled against the grip and gasped for air from behind the creature's suffocating palm. Seeing that he wouldn't be able to break the hold on him, he extended his fangs until the edges of his gums ached from the strain and bit down on the rancid flesh cupped over his nose and mouth, retching at the resulting torrent of bitter blood. To his dismay, however, Harper's tolerance for pain proved higher than he had anticipated, and he only succeeded in earning several more harsh impacts against the trunk he was pinned against. Feeling his oxygen-starved mind begin to cloud, he gathered what focus he had left and extended his aura from his heaving chest. As the crimson streak shot from his chest like a hell-born bolt of lightning and drove into Harper, the demon let out a furious shriek and was hurtled back, tearing the earth beneath him as he landed on his side, writhing and scrambling around on his own twisted limbs. Finally free, Xander dropped to one knee and clutched at his burning chest, coughing and hacking from both his enraged lungs and the lingering taste of the demon's tainted blood. Harper, finding his footing and extending his wings, took to the air with another enraged screech, the current from his takeoff whipping a cloud of dusty air into Xander's face. "Flight's delayed, fucker," Xander heaved with a growl of annoyance as he cocked Yang and fired 3 times into the night, and watched with satisfaction as 2 of the shots pierced one of the creature's wings. As Harper's lopsided attempts at staying airborne failed him, and he began to plummet from the sky, his body twisting and spiraling under the frantic efforts of his single wing, Xander retrieved Yin from the ground and holstered the pair as he started to sprint forward. Not patient enough to wait for his target to land, Xander leapt into the night sky and closed the distance between them. As he rose over the top of some of the shorter trees, he met Harper's flailing body and snagged the beast's leg and pulled him down. When he had successfully positioned the snarling monster beneath him, he drove both of his feet into his belly in a powerful kick that rocketed it towards the earth. Crashing headfirst into the ground, Harper's shoulders separated noisily from the rest of him as his body twisted even more, if such a feat were possible, under its own weight. The vertebrae shifted and distended until Xander was certain Harper was about to snap himself in half. Instead, the crumpling mass simply folded to the side as a row of ribs snapped under the stress. Smirking at the sight, Xander landed a short distance away and began to approach it, pulling out Yin in his right hand as he did. The creature wasn't dead, not yet anyway. He had read enough to know that it wouldn't be that simple. Taking Yang into his left hand and thumbing back the twins' hammers, he stared at the broken and disfigured pile. The demon's warped back twitched and heaved as it tried to pull itself up, its herniated muscles bulging under its gray, bruised flesh. "You audacious little shit," Harper hissed, lowering his head and baring his fangs like an enraged snake. "Stryker was a real vampire, a proud and powerful warrior. Anyone, ally and enemy alike, who gazed upon him knew this to be true. But you..." The creature took a tight hold of his own arm before he popped the shoulder back into place and hissed in pain. "You are not what he was, never will be. Whether or not you are of his blood, there is nothing left of his legacy. You're a stubborn clot chewer, I'll give you that, but the priest made a mistake in..." The twins' dual shots echoed through the woods as Xander opened fire on Harper. The beast, relying on its inherent sang abilities and ignoring its many injuries, vanished from sight. Xander snarled and reholstered the revolvers, knowing they'd do him no good with Harper moving faster than the bullets, and went after him. Focusing his Sangsuiga body and mind, he altered his focus until time had slowed to a near standstill, and his body shifted as well. Once his body was in overdrive, he spotted Harper as he leapt into the branches of a tall tree and started to climb it like an 8-foot-tall squirrel born of nightmares. Xander frowned and thought about the 5 time-frozen bullets hanging somewhere in the air as a testament to their missed target that would never meet their mark. A waste. A goddamn waste. Despite this, 6 shots still remained in Yang and another 3 in Yin, and while his instincts told him to stop and reload, he couldn't afford to lose his target in dropping out of overdrive. Xander had always hated being low on ammo, and Marcus had always preached against letting the magazines, or in this case, the cylinders, get too low, but he was just as preachy about being stupid. And letting his mark get away was definitely categorized as dumb fuck stunt numero uno in Marcus's eyes, especially with a mark as dangerous as Harper. Still moving in overdrive, he chased after the wayward Harper and started up the trunk of the tree. Though jumping would have been easier than the vertical sprint, letting gravity take control of his movements would have forced him out of overdrive and given the demon an edge against him. Knowing that his offenses against the laws of physics would soon catch up with him, he cast out his aura and used it to pull himself to the top of the tree, shooting past the still climbing demon Harper and glaring down at him. As time returned to normal, the 5 enchanted rounds thundered their impact in the distance, and several trees began to loudly topple. The mayhem only distracted Harper for an instant. Seeing Xander, the wide eyes of the monstrous creature widened, and he recoiled, spreading his wings and instinctively flapping at the threat. Confusion and panic laced the demon's face before it remembered that the holes in its wing had made flight impossible. Seeing that its options were limited, Harper's wide, nervous eyes soon turned cold with hatred, and he threw himself into a clumsy glide to the neighboring tree. Xander rolled his eyes and growled as he threw his aura out, grabbing the new tree and pulling himself into its branches. Harper, not noticing this, craned his head back towards the first tree, hoping to get a handle on Xander, and gaping when he noticed the young vampire was gone. Using his enemy's confusion to his advantage, Xander dropped down from his perch above him and took the demon by surprise. Grabbing the startled creature's neck and using his weight and the momentum of the drop to pull himself free from the trunk and sending them both free-falling towards the ground. Blow after blow was shared on the way down, both pummeled not only by one another, but by passing branches of the tree. Xander grimaced as he felt his collarbone crack and his left arm snap in several areas across its length. Despite nature's onslaught on his body, he continued to fight Harper, bearing through the pain as he held the thrashing beast below him and allowed the branches to come, knowing that more bones were breaking within the monster's inhuman body than within his own. "Still think Tennyson was wasting his time?" Xander hissed in his face as the forest floor came to meet them, and the two landed hard with sickening twin thuds.